It is my honor to invite our chief guest of the program, Commodore Anurag Srivastava, the officer in charge of Anti-Submarine Warfare, ASW School. He is from the 85th course of NDA and volunteered for Submarine Arm in May of 1997 and has been a non-specialist navigating officer, communications officer on board, a Sindhu Ghosh class submarine Sindhu Dhwaj, and a Foxtrot class submarine INS Karanj. Upon specializing in ASW, he has done an ASW-2 tenure on board INS Mumbai and ASWO weapons officer tenures on board Sindhuraj. He has also tenanted the duties of Staff Officer Operations at Commodore Commanding Submarines, Comcos West. He has also served as a Joint Director and thereafter as a Director in the Directorate of Submarine Acquisition, DSMAQ. He attended the Higher Air Command course at College of Air Warfare, Secunderabad, and subsequently served as a Director at the Directorate of Submarine Operations. Later, he moved to the billet of Captain Submarines at Comcos West for close to 3 years, during which several operational accomplishments were undertaken by submarines of Comcos West. During pandemic months, he had the honor to command a fully operational INS Talwar for almost 9 months at the forefront of all Western Fleet operations. He assumed command of INS Trishul and ensured her major refit completion. INS Trishul is now the most potent and versatile ship among all the Teg Talwar class ships owing to its latest weapons and sensor configuration. I request Commodore Anurag to deliver the inaugural address.
So we in the Navy generally have something called reaction X. It's called a reaction exercise. So suddenly, the fleet commander will either walk on board your ship or he will just, announce what we have called, we call it signals. So on a signal, suddenly it will come that, so-and-so ship to prepare pakoras and present it to the captain. So the same way, I've suddenly done a reaction X over here, and I'm sure I'm happy to see the reactions. They're pretty good. Swamiji, Dr. Rajiv Prasad, Principal, Amrita School of Business, distinguished speakers, students, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, thank you for the generous introduction. And it is always a pleasure to interact with the future generation who's sitting over here. You are going to be our country's leaders in the future. So it's a very, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And I was told to cover Indian Navy's role as a soft power. But I thought that it will be in the, fitness of things to apprise you with all the roles of the Indian Navy, because this audience is very special. You all will carry impression of the Indian Navy. And so not only the role as a soft power, what we otherwise also do, I thought I'll just brief you all on that. My aim will be to keep it as simple as possible, so it's easy to understand.
In mid-May 2021, India's west coast braced itself for Cyclone Tauktae. Waves over 6 meters high and winds of over 110 kilometers per hour lashed the coast. 100 miles west of Mumbai, a tragedy was unfolding. Mumbai High, with its numerous oil rigs and crew barges, almost 6 stories tall, was bearing the brunt of Tauktae's fury. On the morning of 17th May, 4 large vessels broke their moorings and began drifting. At risk were over 700 lives, and time was running out.
Within an hour of the first report of Papa 305's collision with an oil rig, we swung into action and deployed one of our largest ships, INS Kochi, followed by Kolkata and Talwar. We were sending them towards the eye of the storm, into harm's way. But with lives at stake, it was the only way.
Hurricane force winds and low visibility made leaving harbour difficult. Many vessels adrift immensely increased the risk. Kochi approached barge Papa 305 within 5 hours of leaving harbour and found it flooding and partially submerged. ONGC's offshore energy and great ship Ahalya were standing by to assist. With the sea in full fury, it was impossible to approach the sinking barge. The barge crew then began jumping overboard. Using life rafts or rescue boats was not feasible. Lowering scramble nets and maneuvering the ship closer was the only way. Those too exhausted to climb were hauled up.
For me and my team, there is no greater joy or sense of happiness that we could reunite 125 people back with their families and loved ones.
80 miles east, tug Varaprada had sunk on the afternoon of the 17th. Heading towards barge Papa 305, Kolkata rescued 2 crew members of the ill-fated vessel.
In blinding rain and nearly zero visibility, my team showed great skill and courage in saving the lives of these survivors.
Meanwhile, cargo barge Gal Constructor ran aground off Palghar, 40 miles north of Mumbai.
The barge was damaged and could have broken at any moment.
Racing against time, the Navy and the Coast Guard launched a joint helicopter airlift and operated
At the edge of the safety envelope to ensure all 137 survivors were rescued.
115 miles northwest. Crew barge SS-3 and oil rig Sagar Bhushan were rapidly drifting towards the Gujarat coast. SS-3 was in danger of colliding with an unmanned oil rig. With 303 lives at stake, the Navy immediately deployed INS Talwar, while the ONGC sent 6 ships.
We were able to reassure the crew that they would be safe and to remain on board. Thanks to this, we were able to save their lives and also the ships. With barely an hour to go before collision, the tugs were connected and a tragedy avoided.
We persevered and coordinated search operations for 7 days using all available surface and air assets. We did everything possible to locate survivors and the mortal remains of those affected by this terrible tragedy.
इंडियन नेवी ने बहुत लोगों का जान बचाया है।
थैंक्स टू नेवी की चॉपर आ गया।
मैं तो आज हम यहाँ पे नहीं आने वाले।
बहुत धन्यवाद वो लोग को। मैं तो नेवी को सैल्यूट करता हूँ सर।
The operation was a team effort by the Navy, Coast Guard, ONGC and other agencies.
India's largest search and rescue operation saved 574 people, with the Indian Navy playing a pivotal role. Nature's fury is unpredictable. Our determination is not. Should duty call, we are ready.
So that was a movie that was made about Cyclone Tauktae. And now to give you a scope of my presentation will be as flashed on the screen. To give you a global perspective, in the post-Cold War period, the center of gravity has shifted from the Euro-Atlantic to the Indo-Pacific region. In this region, trade, energy flows, investments, and consumption patterns indicate a potential new hub of global economy. However, whilst the Indo-Pacific has been a harbinger of mutual economic interdependence, it has also thrown up its own security challenges. In a unique but dangerous coincidence, 3 of the world's declared nuclear weapon states, India, China, and Pakistan, live in close proximity. China's increasing assertiveness, North Korea's testing of nuclear devices and ballistic missiles, Iran's nuclear ambiguity, the US's rebalance of Asia, and increasing non-traditional threats are some of the factors that have further added to rising tensions in this region. In East Asia, many countries such as Japan, Russia, China, and the Koreas carry burdens of the past, and perceptions of historical wrongs prevent reconciliation. North Korea has technically remained in a state of war with the US and South Korea since the last 67 years. China and Taiwan continue to remain at heightened tensions. The East China Sea dispute over the Senkaku and Diaoyu Islands has led to heightened tensions between China and Japan, with the issue flaring up since 2013. This year also witnessed China declaring an air defense identification zone, or what we call the ADIZ, over areas which belonged to Japan and South Korea's ADIZ. It is pertinent to mention that most of these disputes appear to be in the maritime region. As an economically and militarily strong China has begun to flex its muscles, the world has increasingly looked towards powers that can temper these growing hegemonic tendencies. India shares a complex relationship with its immediate neighbor China. And apart from engaging in a war in 1962, the two countries continue to have disputed land borders. In the immediate past, the two clashed in the Galwan Valley in the Aksai Chin region in June 2020, and recently last week in Tawang. To just remind you all, in June 2020, I was in command of INS Talwar, and at that point of time, I was deployed in the Gulf of Aden to mark the Chinese ships which are there in the area. We were ready and we were poised in case any action were to take place on the land, then the action would have taken place at the sea. China's increasing participation in port projects in India's neighborhood is viewed with skepticism by both scholars and strategists in India. All these steps by China is seen by India as impinging on its strategic influence in the region. With India's opening of its markets and a deeper global engagement post the Cold War era, India has also become vocal of its national interests. The world community too sees India's mature approach in international affairs, and this is seen by the participation in various multilateral organizations. Now, how does one make a maritime strategy? After all, it has to come from the national strategy. So, how are we going to employ the Indian Navy? It flows from the national strategy, which comes from the maritime strategy, which comes from the national strategy. So, I'll just briefly explain to you how we do. You're all students of business, and I'm sure there's something called business strategy, right? So, the same way that you have a strategy to attack any business, we also have a strategy. And how do we derive the national strategy? The national values come from a nation's culture and history. The national aim is derived from the Constitution of India and amplified through political directions. The mix of national values and national aim gives shape to national interests, which in turn determine the national security objectives. From the national security objectives comes the joint military strategy and the individual services strategy for the land, maritime and air. The joint doctrine for the Indian Armed Forces were published by the Headquarters Integrated Defence Staff in the year of 2006. It articulates our envisaged national interests, security objectives and policies. The Indian Maritime Doctrine leans and draws on from the joint doctrine. What is maritime power strategy and doctrine? Maritime power is the ability of a nation to use the seas to safeguard and progress its national interests. Maritime strategy is the plan by which the maritime power of a state is developed and used for attaining the national objectives within the ambit of the national strategy. Maritime doctrine provides the framework for devising such a plan or strategy seeking to develop and employ maritime power in pursuit of national objectives and interests. The Navy, and particularly the Indian Navy, is the prime instrument and manifestation of the maritime power of a nation state. The raison d'etre of a navy is to safeguard the nation's use of the seas for its legitimate sovereign purposes, whilst concurrently guarding against inimical use of the sea by others. That means I will not let the enemy use it for his purposes, and I will always use it for my own country. The Indian Maritime Doctrine deals specifically with the concepts and principles of employment of India's naval power. So now we are coming directly to the Indian Navy. What is the tasking of the Indian Navy? The Indian Maritime Doctrine focuses on the application of naval power across the spectrum of conflict, including war, less than war situations, and peace. It reflects on the concepts, characteristics, and context for employment of India's maritime military power so as to unite their actions in support of India's national security objectives. The doctrine primarily addresses the military strategic level, whilst it also covers the operational level. This document is the capstone doctrinal publication for the Indian Navy, which serves as the guiding light in all its maritime endeavors. I thought this sentence is very relevant and you should all be very aware of this, youngsters and the future generation, that the purpose of war and the use of military force is always political, not military. The justification of war is enshrined in the national security policy, which directs when and why military force is to be used. It is always the political will of a nation which will decide when the military will be used to go to war. So remember that. It is the political will. The military might is available, but it is the political will of a nation which decides when we go to war. Now we'll briefly look at India's maritime environment and interests. This is a quote by Sardar K.M. Panikkar, who was a statesman in the 1940s and 50s, and it's still relevant as of today. It is the geographical position of India that changes the character of the Indian Ocean. The land which is jutting out 1,000 miles or 1,800 kilometers into the Indian Ocean, that is what changes the character of the Indian Ocean. That is why the stance of India or the position of India in the Indian Ocean region is so important. Now this is something that you all should know. It's called the 70, 80, 90, 100 rule. 70% of the earth consists of water. 75% of the world's population lives at less than 200 nautical miles from the coast. 80% of the world's economic centers lie in coastal regions. 97% of the global trade by volume flows by the sea, and 100% of the internet data that flows anywhere is by undersea cables. That is the importance of the oceans or the seas. Historically, man has depended on the seas for his economic and social well-being always. Coming to India's maritime outlook, you can see the vast coastline of India, 7,500 kilometers plus. Number of islands, exclusive economic zone, or the EEZ as we call it. This slide shows the shipping traffic in our area of interest, which is almost 1,20,000 ships every year. 2/3 of the world's oil, 1/3 of the bulk cargo, and half the container shipment transits through the Indian Ocean. 90% of Indian trade by volume and 70% by value is also through the sea route. To just give you an idea of how busy the IOR is, I just thought this is the screenshot which I took on my laptop. There is something called the AIS, or the Automatic Identification System. Each dot given over there, the green, the red, the blue, each dot represents a ship. And these ships, this is every second it gets updated. So these are the ships which are there in the Indian Ocean region. And more importantly, those ships which are not there are ships which are less than 500 tons, which do not need to identify on the AIS, the AIS system. And also the multinational warships which are present over there. Warships don't need to identify themselves. And further, the fishing trawlers. The number of fishing trawlers which are available in this. The Indian Ocean region, though it's a huge ocean, looks very crowded as of now. You see the various choke points and the ISLs or international shipping lanes in the Indian Ocean region. Two most important are the Strait of Hormuz, which is there on the top left, and the Malacca Straits. Maximum of the trade flows through that. The Indian Ocean region is manifested with a lot of issues like narcotics, piracy, human trafficking, Chinese presence obviously, island territories being dominated and being captured by illegal people. IUU fishing means illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, wherein there is a dearth of the marine species in that area. With this background now, we come to the roles of the Indian Navy, which is enshrined in the Indian Maritime Doctrine. The full range of operations in which a nation's naval forces may be involved is vast, ranging from high-intensity war fighting at one end to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operations at the other end. This broad continuum of operations can be broken down into distinct roles, each demanding a specific approach to the conduct of operations. Accordingly, the four main roles of the Indian Navy are military, diplomatic, constabulary and benign. The military role. I don't think I need to elaborate much on that. Most of you are very well aware and have played various games. Anybody has played battleships? No? Yeah, good. So, I will not further on the military aspect. Naval diplomacy entails, and here is where the soft power comes in. Naval diplomacy entails the use of naval forces in support of foreign policy objectives to build bridges of friendship and strengthen international cooperation on the one hand, and to signal capability and intent to deter potential adversaries on the other. Navies perform a diplomatic role on account of two main characteristics. Just remember these two characteristics of the Navy. The first is the status as a comprehensive instrument of a country's sovereign power, whereupon their very presence in or of a certain area signals the nation's political intent and commitment to pursue national interest in that region. Hence, their presence or absence can be calibrated to send a political message to potential friends and foes alike. If we send 3 warships off Sri Lankan coast, or we send 3 warships off the Pakistan coast, it intends, we have shown our intent, and that shows to the country what we mean. We can calibrate by sending more ships over there, or we can de-escalate by withdrawing the ships from there. The second characteristic facilitating the Navy's diplomatic role lies in the attribute of maritime forces, including access, mobility, sustenance, reach, flexibility, and versatility. These combine to offer a variety of tools for furthering national interests and pursuing foreign policy goals. Naval forces can be readily deployed and rapidly be withdrawn also. It has been said that a man of war, we call ships man of war, is amongst the best ambassadors of a country. An invitation for a warship to visit another country is an act of friendship and respect, because a warship is a sovereign instrument of the state. When ships of the Indian Navy visit other nations' ports, they project the nation and its people to the host, military, government and civilian personnel in that country. As the slide depicts, the Navy has to protect India's offshore assets, exclusive economic zone, and also ensure good order at sea. The term benign. The benign role is so named because violence has no part to play in its execution, nor is the potential to apply force a necessary requisite for undertaking these operations. Examples of benign tasks include humanitarian aid, disaster relief, search and rescue, ordnance disposal, diving assistance, salvage operations, diving operations, hydrographic surveys, and so on and so forth. The Chief Hydrographer to the Government of India is the Navigational Area or NAV Area 8 Coordinator and provides hydrographic services to all countries in the world, including navigational warnings in this area. This is an important peacetime naval mission for which naval resources are constantly deployed. Naval survey ships also provide assistance to friendly foreign countries in preparing nautical charts. They are the charts that we use at sea. The Indian Navy has been the preferred instrument of the state for delivering relief material and services via sea to help India and India's maritime neighbors in their hour of need. This has also helped project national soft power towards improving relations with our neighbors and the regional maritime environment. This was amply demonstrated in the aftermath of the Asian tsunami of 2004, when 27 Indian naval ships were sailed within the first 12 hours of the disaster. This was built up to a force of 36 ships, large number of aircraft, and about 5,000 naval personnel over the next few days who were deployed for HADR not only on India's east coast and island territories but also to Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Indonesia. Now we'll come to the role of armed forces and particularly Indian Navy's role in disaster relief operations. On account of their vast potential to meet any adverse challenge, speed of operational response, and the resources and capabilities at their disposal, armed forces have historically played a major role in disaster relief operations. Any disaster management can broadly be divided into 4 stages, which are preparatory, initial response, sustenance, and finally the stabilization stage. Armed forces are the major contributors, as you can see, in the second and the third stage. HADR operations are not military operations in a conventional sense, and hence armed forces have to follow certain guidelines that differ from conventional combat guidelines. Coming to the Indian Navy, the Indian Navy has ships like the LPD, which is Landing Platform Dock, the LSTs, Landing Ship Tanks, the LCU, Landing Craft Utilities. These are warships designed to carry personnel, army personnel, to land on board islands and to take our army to whichever place we desire. However, these are suitable platforms for undertaking HADR operations due to the inherent crew carrying capabilities, feasibility of undertaking helicopter operations, and possibilities of conversion into hospital ships. In addition, the tankers enhance the reach of units, facilitating prolonged deployment in far-flung areas. With the state-of-the-art systems, these ships can become efficient command platforms towards crisis management. The Indian Navy has in its inventory aerial reconnaissance platforms such as the P-8I, the Dornier, the UAVs, and the helicopters. Aerial photography from these platforms, UAV stands for Unmanned Aerial Vehicles, as I'm sure most of you know. Aerial photography from these platforms can prove to be extremely useful in obtaining critical information of affected areas necessary to plan relief operations. The Indian Navy has been involved in various HADR and search and rescue missions which have extended across the Indian Ocean region. Some of these are just shown. In order to be adequately prepared to tackle disaster situations, Indian Navy has taken efforts through technological developments, evolving concepts of deployment, training exercises. Indian Navy frequently takes inputs from the meteorological department as well as friendly foreign countries towards early warning and prediction of the impending disasters. These inputs help track the path of cyclones and storms, thus help in positioning of assets and planning operations in an effective manner. In a recent incident of the coast of Orissa, because of the warnings that we had got earlier, the entire population was evacuated from the path of the storm and taken to storm shelters, which have been already, you must be aware, they've been built in the coast of Orissa. Not a single casualty was reported in the entire cyclone which passed over that area. That goes to show how prepared we are becoming nowadays. All Indian naval ships on operational deployment carry something called HADR bricks. These bricks are nothing but already prefabricated wheat, rice, atta, sugar, those kind of, everything is readied, blankets, medicines. That's why we call it HADR brick, humanitarian aid and disaster relief brick. So all ships carry HADR bricks on board. As a result, all ships can commence relief operations immediately on reaching the affected area. In addition, HADR bricks are maintained at all naval stations and can be loaded immediately in ships tasked to move out for HADR operations at short notice. All Indian naval ships have portable drinking water plants on board to provide water, what we call the RO plants, the reverse osmosis plants. The only thing, the difference between our house RO plant and the ship RO plant is probably a ship's RO plant of a tanker can produce about 100 tons of water in a day. As brought out earlier, ships such as the LPD and the LST can act as hospital ships. In addition, survey ships can also be changed over to the role as hospital ship when required. Undertaking HADR operations has been a focus area of the training curriculum in the Indian Navy. Additionally, joint HADR exercises are also carried out every year. HADR, by joint we mean with all agencies of India. It's not only the Army, Navy and Air Force. All agencies of India, joint HADR exercises are carried out at least once in a year. HADR is also a theme of number of bilateral and multilateral exercises undertaken by the Indian Navy with friendly foreign countries. Since 2017, Indian Navy's deployment in the Indian Ocean region has been structured under the mission-based deployment concept. As a result, Indian ships have a presence throughout the Indian Ocean region and can be diverted to disaster-affected areas at short notice. As I highlighted earlier, all Indian naval ships carry HADR bricks on board, and operations can commence immediately on arrival. Now, this is a new concept that we started in 2017. The areas where you see in yellow, one Indian naval ship is present over there at all given points of time. So that many ships are deployed at any point of time in the Indian Ocean region, so that not only for HADR, we are basically there to monitor the seas and to safeguard our own national interest, as in all our tankers and traffic, merchant traffic, which is of Indian origin, that is protected. Indian Navy has been an active member of the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. One of the key initiatives of the IONS is formulation of IONS working group towards HADR activities. The IONS had promulgated a comprehensive document for HADR operations towards standardizing the procedure and enhancing interoperability. This was validated during the Maiden Sea exercise this year in March 22 in the Arabian Sea. Further, recently the 5th IONS working group meeting was carried out at Bangladesh in August 22. So you see, our multilateral construct is working. The way India takes charge of the entire countries all around us and makes them, makes them feel a party to it and not an aggressor We do not talk as an aggressor, but we talked as facilitators, which is why India is welcome in all the forums in the world. As part of the Honorable Prime Minister's vision of Sagar, that is security and growth for all in the region, Indian Navy has visited several foreign countries and extended a helping hand wherever required. Now I shall quickly share with you glimpses of contribution by armed forces in the major calamities that have occurred in the last decade. I took these two examples because they are closer to home, closer to us. Cyclone Oki passed 60 kilometers from Trivandrum and developed into a severe cyclonic storm 100 kilometers north of Minicoy Islands on 1st December 2017. How many of you were there in Kochi that time? Nobody? Cyclone Oki? Nobody remembers? Yeah. Okay. Op Sanyam was launched as a two-pronged approach. The first being the immediate requirement of search and rescue of fishermen which are already in distress at sea. They were caught in the storm at sea. And the second involving gearing up for undertaking HADR operations at the Lakshadweep Islands. 5 ships from the Southern Naval Command were deployed immediately towards Op Sanyam. 3 helicopters were based at Trivandrum to undertake search and rescue operations. And the P-8I aircraft undertook low passes for visual confirmation and for directing rescue efforts. Op Madad. Following heavy rains in August 2018, a large number of districts in Kerala experienced large-scale flooding. Op Madad was launched by the Southern Naval Command from 9th to 22nd August 2018. Incidentally, the Southern Naval Command is based in Kochi, and I hope all of you are aware of that. This is the headquarters of the Southern Naval Command. A total of 112 rescue and relief teams were deployed and about 17,000 personnel were rescued. And I must say the efforts of Southern Naval Command were well appreciated. A few of the incidents wherein Indian Armed Forces have extended assistance to friendly foreign countries are now shown. I would like to conclude by saying that the threat of natural disasters is omnipresent. While disasters cannot be prevented, their effect can certainly be mitigated. Further, it is important that HADR training exercises should be the key focus area for bilateral and multilateral constructs. In the Indian Ocean region, this requires a high standard of coordination, and this is possible only by India. It is the only nation which can make this possible. Indian Navy's proactive planning, operational readiness, and pooling in of resources has ensured that we are the net security provider and all nations look up to India in the times of need, whether they are natural disasters or civil emergencies. This speaks volumes about the soft power of the Indian Navy and of India as such. Okay, last but not the least, a small bit of advice to all you young students sitting over here. Do a lot of reading. Read a lot of professional books, read a lot of whatever you want, but read and read. Because whatever you read will come into your subconscious, it will help you focus, and it will also give you ideas for out-of-box thinking. And a lot of out-of-box thinking will be required in the years to come, in the years that you have to lead this nation to greatness. Okay? With that, I leave you with a small image of how we, spent our Christmas and New Year in a submarine. On board a ship, the anniversary of the ship, how we do tug of war on the ship. And finally, a glimpse of how we operate with multinational powers. With that, I've finished. Thank you so much for being such a patient audience.
Thank you so much, sir, for that wonderful presentation. We are all indeed very proud and extremely grateful to the Indian Armed Forces for being a perfect example for balancing soft power and hard power. Thank you for showing us how we can use the same to deliver exemplary results.